Hey guys, Rover here. Now today I want to make a guide on Romann. Now for those who have been on my channel for a while, you've seen me use him in both PvP and RTA as my go-to AoE dispel unit. Now he's really good in PvP, more like his skills are mainly used for PvP. But he's not used that often by players because, well, Basar exists, and in terms of dispel units alone, Basar is better. However, what Romann has over Basar is that he has tons of CR manipulation. Like Basar, he's all about bringing utility to your team. And with that, let's have a look at his skills, possible gears, and artifacts you can use depending on how you want to use him. Now Romann's first skill, Gravity Arrow, not only pushes enemies back, but also brings himself forward by 8% at base, up to 10% at +3 skill enhance. Now it's very small, not that big of an impact, but note that between the target and himself, there is a shift in 16 to 20% CR. It has some uses, but very situational. I mean, for example, let's say both the enemy and Romann is both at 100% combat readiness. It's Romann's turn, and your DPS is around 90 plus combat readiness. Now using this skill pushes the target back enough for your DPS to take their turn, completely stripping away the opponent's turn. Now another situation this can be used is when you are versing a team that relies on turn order. Usually cleave teams heavily rely on that, and a small shift on turn order can screw up their cleave. Now aside from that, the skill is a nice CR boost for Romann, which makes him a bit faster in cycling through his skills. I wouldn't spend molas on this skill, however. You are spending 3 molas just for that extra 2% CR, which is in my opinion a ripoff. But you know, if you use him quite a lot, feel free to go for it. Now Romann's second skill, Gravitation, is another CR manipulation skill. Attacks all enemies with a 50% chance of decreasing their combat readiness by 15% and triggering 4 times. 20% CR if you enhance this skill up to 3 times. You are pretty much rolling dices here. You may think, oh, 50% chance, trigger 4 times, so we're looking at 30 to 40% average, right? Wrong. You can also get screwed over by resistance. So I'd say around 15 to 20% average, but just give him enough effectiveness and you should be fine. Imagine if you hit that 45 to 80% CR decrease. That's like you've completely denied them by 1 turn. So it's not all that bad, but as I said before, you are rolling dices. Now the skill is at 3 turn cooldown, and using its Soulburn effect will decrease its cooldown by 2 turns, which means you can use it again on the next turn, slowing down your opponent even more. Now compare this to skill 1. Skill enhancing this skill is way better. 5% more combat readiness at a cost of 3 Molagoras. I'd rather take that. Now lastly, Romann's third skill, Event Horizon, attacks all enemies, dispel all buffs, and increase his CR by 50%. If any of the enemy is buffed, this skill will deal 30% more damage and inflicts 2 poison debuffs, as well as increasing his CR by an additional 30%. In total, that's 80% CR. Now that's a lot of effects going on, but essentially, only use this skill if the enemy has a buff. If not, better off using his S2 instead, because the only thing that you will get if you use this, and if the other team has no buffs, well, that's only 50% combat readiness, so it's not really worth it. The good thing about this is that even if you are very unlucky and don't strip any buffs, Romann still gets 80% CR boost, as well as inflicting 2 poison debuffs. The sad thing is, If you compare this to Basar's S3, this is basically a baby version. Heck, even Romann's S3 plus S2 is still slightly below Basar's S3. That's because Basar can deny buffs from the enemy, while Romann has more CR decrease plus extra damage from poison. Now one thing to note is that this does have a high cooldown at 5 turns, and enhancing this to +3 will reduce the cooldown by 1. Now depending on how you use Romann in your team, you may or may not need that extra turn decrease. This is because he's weak as heck, low base HP, and generally, from how I've used him so far, he doesn't survive for long. Now how I typically use Romann is strip off immunity, and if he survives on his next turn, push back the enemy till he dies. Now with gears, I recommend to use speed set, always for Romann. That's because with dispel units, you want to get rid of immunity buffs from the enemy team to make it easier for your team to wipe them out, or take out priority targets. Now the good thing about using speed set, especially for Romann, is that even if the enemy team do not use immunity sets, you can use his S2 as an alternative to, hopefully, if RNGesus blesses you, pushes them behind your other units. Another thing why speed is good is this lets him cycle through his skills. And if you have enough souls, you can spam his S2 to slow and deny turns. For 2 gear sets, I would go for hit set. The worst thing that can happen is if Romann does not remove buffs, especially on high priority targets. Once that happens, you are in for a bad time. I know, it happened to me quite a few times, even with over 100% effectiveness, but you know, the more effectiveness he has, the better. You can also use health set if you want him to survive for another turn, so you can use his S2, or you can use immunity set if you are not confident in his speed. However, try to prioritize speed over 2 gear sets. You can use a broken set if the substat gives, 9+ speed. I think that's good enough. Now talking about stats for necklace, always effectiveness, health percentage on ring, and speed boots. For substats, high priority on both speed and effectiveness, while secondary stats on either defense percentage, HP percentage, or effect resistance. Now effect resistance is good if you are not using immunity set. If you want Romann to do some damage, you can always add attack percentage on his substat. I mean, his base attack is slightly higher compared to other units, so if you do have that, it's not too bad. Oh, and I would also like to add about Romann's imprint. I would highly suggest to use ego fragments on him to give him extra effectiveness. He's going to need all the effectiveness he can get. Now Romann does have his own exclusive equipment. It gives him 5 to 10 extra speed, which is really good since he has low base speed. As someone that prefers to go first, this is something you don't want to miss. Out of the 3 equipments available, I would choose either the one that gives him a barrier when using S2, or dispel a buff when using S2. The one I always use is the dispel. This is because when he gets to his second turn, after using S3, most likely the enemy team are putting their buffs up, especially if your Romann is going first. And not only that, if your Romann is fast enough and his S3 doesn't dispel buffs, then at least you get another chance to dispel it using this equipment. Alright, for artifacts, 5-star artifacts that you can use is Abyssal Crown, and it's pretty nice. Since Romann has 2 AoE skills, one which can be spammed at the cost of 10 souls, you have a higher chance to deny enemy teams. I mean, you got the CR decrease and the stun from this artifact. Now since Romann has Dispel on his S3, it does make you question, does this artifact trigger after or before Dispel? I haven't tried it on him specifically, but I do know that Basar with the Abyssal Crown works, so it's safe to say it works on Roman too. Chances are pretty low, 12 to 24%, but not too bad, especially if you use him in defense teams. I think most people use that artifact for defense team anyway, so yeah, that's an idea. If you participated in the Guilty Gear collab, Necro and Undine is another good one. Just using this artifact at max gives Roman an extra turn, if the enemy is buffed. So you have 50% CR boost from his S3, plus 30% if the enemy is buffed, and since this is an AoE attack, plus 10 to 20% CR boost from this artifact. However, if you don't have it maxed, whether he gets another turn or not, entirely depends on the enemy speed, so keep that in mind if you are using this artifact. Now for 4-star artifacts, Sira Ren is good for Roman. When you use his S3, after he removes immunity, there is a 25 to 50% chance to add a random buff. Now all the debuffs from this artifact are all good for Roman. I mean, even the poison is good for Roman. Add that on top of his S3, that's 3 stacks of poison dealing 15% of the enemy's max HP. Now the other one, which I'm sure you are more likely to use, is Tagahel. Great for any kind of team, or you can even use it for himself. Spamming S2 to completely deny enemy turns, well, sounds like a move to me, especially in RTA, so that's great. That's great. Now for 3-star artifacts, the only one I would recommend is Cursed Compass. Gives Roman a boost in effectiveness and makes sure that he strips those buffs. Because if he doesn't, well, that's 1 turn wasted. I for one uses Roman for PvP and sometimes RTA. If you don't have Basar, then Roman is kind of like a $2 shop version of him. You don't have to 6-star him. I think 5-star is more than enough, and the only skill you would invest in is his S2, depending on how you use him. His S2 is RNG, and it's unpredictable. You never know what you'll get, but when it does trigger, twice, 3 times, even 4 times, that's a big difference to your team. And if he's fast enough, you can contain the entire enemy team and deny them of their turns. And with that, that's all I have for Roman. Use this guide as a reference on how you want to build him. I'm no expert, just sharing what I know. And with that, thanks for watching, and leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more Epic 7 content. Also leave a comment on how you build your Roman. That would be nice to see. Alright, cheers. Rover out.